fear that the room will completely overfill. My name is Amy Glassmeyer, and I'm the head of the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Welcome to the year 2010 spring component of the annual Mighty Energy Series. Next month, our speaker will be Bruce Logan from Penn State, who will talk about his work on converting algae into energy. So please mark the calendars for that talk. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Susan Tierney, who will be talking today about modernizing our energy system and how difficult it is, but why we should do it anyway. And let me just give you a little bit of particulars about her history. She currently is the managing principal at the Analysis Group, which is an economic, financial, and business strategy consulting group where she specializes in energy industry issues. She's served in that same type of position in a number of circumstances over the last decade. She also works with energy companies such as Rnergy Holdings, a biomass to electricity company that is a successor to Catalytica Energy Systems, where she served as a director since December 2001. She is the chairperson of the board of directors of the Energy Foundation and Clean Air, Cool Planet nonprofit organizations. And she also serves as the director of the Northeast State Center for Clean Air Future. In addition to both her private sector and nonprofit work, she has done her time working in the public sector.
Hiding the ball and chain.
And I could go through a lot of things and say many, but I think there's a couple that are really quite interesting. One, she served as the Assistant Secretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Energy under the Clinton administration. And prior to that, she held various positions in energy and environmental departments in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, including Secretary for Environmental Affairs and the Commissioner of the Department of Public Utilities. When she was 12, she was an assistant professor at the University of California, Irvine, and she completed her doctorate at Cornell, and along the way got all the other necessary degrees. So with no further ado, please let me welcome Dr. Susan Tierney.
Well, I can't tell you how excited I am to come here. I mean, this is the mighty, mighty MIT program, and it's really fun. And you can see that I'm kind of a Johnny One Note on energy that whole career since I was 12. So it's really fun for me to be here, and I really appreciate that you guys have come out on a Tuesday afternoon before cocktail hour and come here to spend some time. So I appreciate it. I try to think of what might be interesting for people at MIT to hear about from somebody like me who's had a foot in academia and a foot in government and a foot in consulting and nonprofits for a lot of years. And there's a lot of buzz right now and huge interest in thinking about how to modernize our energy systems, not just here in America, but in other countries as well. So that seemed like something that might be appropriate for MIT. And then I also thought about, well, you guys are the technologists. What could I possibly tell you that you don't already know? So I thought, why it's so damn hard to get it into place out there in the real systems. So I thought that's what I would talk about. And then end with this business about keep going, it's good, keep trying, it's worth the effort. So I'm going to go in the first third of my talk just talking about putting together some of the areas of interest in what it means to modernize the energy system. What are people talking about when they say that? Then I thought I would talk about some of the real challenges that exist in actually deploying technology, either technologies that's almost ready to be commercial or things that look like they're commercial and they're not getting put in place. And I thought I would talk principally about those things and then close it up again with why I care about the fact that you're working on some of these projects. I'm going to focus on electricity, in part because it's easiest for me to talk about. I spent a lot of time in my career on electricity issues, but there's a good reason to talk about electricity. Most of my information, by the way, is going to be about the US, so I'll stop saying that. Most of the information is about the US. And this is the US electric system from 2007, projected forward to 2025. And you can see electricity is a big piece of it. Oil for transportation is huge. Natural gas for non-electrical use is a much smaller piece. Way up there is oil for process use and other things, and then other. But electricity is a big piece of it, for sure, and it's growing relative to the whole set and portfolio of energy supplies. But moreover, so much of the direct fuels that we use to create electricity go to losses. So it is a huge sink of economic and natural resources that are going into electricity, and that's a reason to talk about it, as I'll talk about a little bit more. Also, a reason to focus on electricity is because it's at the cusp of a lot of interesting things going on in the national discussions about what happens to energy. Certainly, coal is important to that discussion. Coal is about half of our electric use, and it's likely to stay that way going forward. Even if you had a doubling of renewables, you'd still see coal playing a large role unless massive transformational changes occur in our electricity system. And I'm going to show you why that's not likely to happen in the near future, unfortunately. Those are coal plants on the right. They're all over the country, but certainly dominated in certain parts of the country that I'll come back to in a little while. Coal is also important, and talking about electricity is important because we are the Saudi Arabia of coal around the United States. We have a quarter of the world's reserves in coal in the United States. I already said half of our power comes from coal. We have, by current estimates, 400 years of supply based on projections of today's usage of coal. So it's a big deal to think about coal. And it's also a big deal when you think about the carbon footprint of coal. So it's a paradox that we have to think about, and that's why I'm going to talk about electricity as we think about modernizing the grid. I said a few minutes ago that losses make a huge difference. 2/3 of the BTUs that are going to produce electricity are lost compared to what's actually delivered to customers at the end of the day when you plug things into your sockets. Huge. So work on efficiency of combustion. That would be great. Coal, as a percentage of electricity carbon emissions, it's 85%. It's a big deal, obviously. And electricity's share of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States are around 40%. So again, electricity is a big deal in the carbon story, and coal is huge. Another reason to talk about electricity when we're talking about modernizing the energy system is that we actually have a lot of old power plants. So this picture up top, I'm sure you guys can read it up there. Would you like to read me what those say? On the left-hand side is a capacity that's still operating today that's built before 1960. And those are the decades in which new amounts of generating capacity has been added. So those are each standalone amounts. If you added all those bars together, you'd have all of the power plant capacity in the United States. So we have a lot of old stuff. So we have, I guess it's about a quarter of it's way younger than I am. And half of it's way older than a lot of you people here in terms of being 30 years old. And so there's a lot of capacity that is essentially online in the system, ready to be used, but not being used. It's very inefficient as it goes the older sides. And so if we're thinking about modernizing, that picture offers something. Yeah?
What are the units of the green?
The green are thousands of megawatts. And on the left-hand side is percentage of generating capacity, and they are cumulative as you go forward, okay? Oh, gosh, this is MIT. I have to be precise. Okay, so I'll just kind of not be precise here for a few more minutes. I'm going to talk for a little while about some expressions of why there's so much interest and what are people talking about when they say they want to modernize. I was just talking to John Kasakian and Dick Schmalensee, and I said I was going to talk about modernize, and they said, well, what's modern? Well, what does that mean? Is it cheaper? Is it more efficient? Is it just new? Or what does that mean? So let's talk about what that means. Congress thinks modernizing the energy system means a whole lot of different things. And there have been 3 laws passed in the last couple of years that have a lot of activity associated with this issue of modernizing the energy systems, and again, focusing on electricity. There's research and development money. There's programs to increase the standards for putting lighting systems in place and refrigerators. There's money to provide loan guarantees for carbon capture and sequestration projects for power, to make those carbon plants in the future much less emitting of carbon into the atmosphere. There's biofuels, you know, methanol for vehicles. Smart grid, that sounds pretty modern. So there's all sorts of things that have come through Congress, and those are the kinds of things that they talk about when they talk about modern. We don't know what's going to happen this year. We can take bets. You guys can write down at the end of the day, we'll take a democratic vote on whether we think there will be a climate and energy bill, which will essentially be doing a lot of those other things and also perhaps putting a cap on carbon. So the Economic Recovery Act had billions and billions and billions for modernizing the grid, $55 billion for expenditure over the next 2 years. It includes a lot of money for energy efficiency improvements in homes, in offices, in factories, and that's, you know, putting today's technology into homes and replacing them. There's also a lot of money for grid modernization, and that's everything from just reconductoring wires that are old and they could carry more capacity on existing transmission lines, to putting in meters in buildings and homes around so that people can actually see what they're using for electricity and figure out what the cost of buying electricity would be at certain times a day. Tons of money there to modernize things. Oh, there's some more. There's more money associated with a combination of efficiency in the wires to make them so that they're moving power much more efficiently. And there's also money for carbon capture and sequestration, and that's principally R&D money, and several projects have just been awarded money to actually get some demonstration projects going in Texas and in the Midwest. So last week, President Obama talked about modernizing the grid. Who heard his speech? Okay, so I'm sure you heard him say, the nation that leads the clean energy economy will be the nation that leads the global economy. Well, the Republicans said the same thing basically right after it. So it was on the agenda of the nation's spokesman at the moment in terms of thinking about how to move and advance technologies and put them into markets, create jobs for Americans. I think he even mentions lowering the tax bill. I mean, excuse me, the energy bill, the tax bill, sorry. I meant to say your utility bill. And that's interesting because I haven't heard that many people talk about modernizing our energy systems and lowering our energy bills. So that'll be fun. Yesterday, that'll be fun. That's where you're going to have jobs, right? You're going to figure out how to do that. Yesterday, Secretary Stephen Chu announced the new budget for the Department of Energy, and he's talking about modernizing the things. So on his first page of his budget presentation, he says they're going to restart the American nuclear power industry with some more money. There's some reshifting of the monies for nuclear technology, reshifting of the money for energy efficiency and renewables. There's going to be a manufacturing tax credit in order to keep manufacturing jobs at home associated with clean, modern energy systems. You see that most of the money in the energy side of the Department of Energy budget, which is a teeny little piece of the Department of Energy budget, is going to energy efficiency and renewables. There's also money for nuclear, as I said, and for grid enhancement. So those are all of interest, highlight in incremental, they're not attracting to Colorado. So there's a ton of states, 29 states have adopted a requirement that when you want to sell electricity there, it has to be green content. These, I love maps, so I had to put up a couple more maps. These are maps of different projects underway around the United States. These all happen to be in the West. These are different projects attempting to be the winner in the competition for whose new grid is going to bring renewables from the plain states down to the people in Arizona and California. So there's all sorts of ones, and some states like Arizona and Texas are deciding that there are locations where there are zones for high wind potential, And they're building transmission wires out to those areas before the wind generators arrive as a way to induce wind development to come to the area. So there's a lot of activity to try to spur clean energy development. The Electric Power Research Institute has periodically been looking at what it would take in terms of putting technologies into the real world if we actually wanted to turn the corner on carbon emissions. So the top curve is the business as usual projection of carbon dioxide emissions. I think it is rather than, yeah, CO2, not greenhouse gases. So that's CO2. You see where we are today at the top of that chart. And then they start assuming if you deployed technology, advanced nuclear, advanced coal, advanced renewables, you electrified the vehicle fleet with electric cars, you made much more efficient storage systems so that you could actually start going down the curve there as you exchanged yesterday's technology with much more replaced, advanced, more efficient, cleaner technology. So a lot of people trying to figure out how we could solve the climate nut with a modern energy system. And mighty MIT is on the program too. MIT's contributions in recent years have been some amazing studies to try to figure out how you would solve some of the problems that impede penetration of some of the hoped for technologies. I was just meeting today with folks. There's a new one underway on transmission, and figuring out how to modernize the grid is, well, that'll be the next one, the future of the grid. So this week, or I guess last week, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates companies and what they have to disclose to their shareholders about risks, financial risks, required that companies in the future may have to provide information about their carbon risk, either in terms of whether or not there's new legislation on the horizon that could affect the company's business lines, or whether or not there's adaptation from climate change going to happen. So here's an example of where there's more interest in things that essentially may create more demand to mitigate risk for companies associated with getting cleaner technologies in the mix. Lots of other examples of organizations, groups of people involved in it. Let's see, a couple days ago, private equity is bullish on clean energy, a New York Times article. Lots of funds of private equity firms are funding, investment in new technologies. Environmental entrepreneurs, of whom we have one of the leaders, the regional leaders in the front row, the New England Clean Energy Council, are organizations of businesses who are working on these new technologies and trying to help condition the policy environment in order to move them into place. Everybody knows the McKinsey cost curve over there on the right? So I made it really little so that you just pay homage to the McKinsey cost curve. And there's a number of other programs, foundation-funded programs, trying to move clean technology into markets. So this is a picture over the last 5 years of investment worldwide in private equity for clean energy technologies. So there was a little bit of a dip there last year. You can see over there on the right. And it's picking up again. So in the last year, in spite of the fact that it was a tough year, $13 billion went into private equity. That's not borrowing money from the bank. That's borrowing money from private equity funds or private investors. We saw a huge upsurge a couple of years ago, and they're bullish, as they say, on getting it going again. This is the last couple of days. China's leading the global race to make clean energy. I was just reading the governor of North Carolina says the governor who wins on the clean energy picture is going to be the winner on the global economy. So it's out there. So if that's what we're interested in, how come it takes so long and it's so hard to get things going? The bottom line is yesterday's technology is really sticky, and it's really hard to get a foothold for very much else. So, okay, this is like a game. If you can read these fast, you can see what are all the uncertainties out there in terms of if you were an investor and you had to produce electricity and you wanted to add a new generator, say, what would you think about the carbon legislation? What would you think about what's going to happen to interest rates going forward? Let's say you have an $8 billion project that you want to get going on carbon capture and sequestration. Is anybody going to loan you that money? Is demand for electricity going to go on if we actually have success on energy efficiency going? Tons of uncertainty that are affected by human behavior, by conditions of societies, economies, technologies. Will you guys solve the technology challenges? That would be nice, but huge uncertainties, which chills investment in the first place because people don't know if they're going to get their money back if they make the investments in the context of all of these variety of things. Natural gas prices is up there in the middle on the top. Natural gas prices a year and a half ago were about 3 times what they are today. A lot of clean energy technology could be financed if you're competing with expensive natural gas power run on yesterday's machine. But if that crashed, then you're not going to have such a nice environment for investment. So a lot of uncertainties are certainly going to chill and make people more cautious, again, with $1 billion bets or $8 billion bets. As an example, this summer there were estimates of the carbon allowance price that would emerge from the markets once Congress passed a cap and trade program, assuming Congress were to do that. So this was a model of the different assumptions about under different scenarios of what carbon prices would look like under the Waxman-Markey bill that was passed by the House. So by 2020, the range is $16 per ton to $93 per ton. A huge amount of money difference between those, which could make or break an investment. By 2030, a mere 20 years from now, the range is $23 to $190. There's none of these are the right answer, of course, but the range of uncertainties, again, substantially affects whether or not people think that they want to take a bet on a very large investment. These are really capital intensive. And the players in the industry have certain requirements. For example, most of the country, a lot of the country has electric utilities who are regulated, who are the parties, for the most part, who are making investments in new energy technology. Some parts of the country, like Massachusetts, that's not so much the case. I'll talk about them in a moment. But in the regulated industry, if a utility is going to be putting a $10 million or a $50 million investment on putting smart meters out, or reconductoring the wires in an area, or building a new advanced technology, they want to know if they're going to get their money back. And they want to know if in advance the regulator is going to allow a rate change. And so there's going to be reluctance unless they know they've got a pretty good case to make that it was a good bet. And when you saw all those uncertainties, you can picture the hearings that are going to litigate about whether or not the bet was right on a number of things. That makes people very cautious. In the parts of the country where it's not a utility and it will be a company deciding on its shareholders' risk whether or not they want to invest. In fact, usually those companies, that's Sue Tierney Power Company, I want to sell my electricity to National Grid to sell it to you, or to NSTAR to sell it to you. What I want to do is control my costs so that I can make a contract to sell my power to somebody and not go short at the end of the day. So I'm going to have a lot of contracts with the builder of my project and a lot of contracts with the gas supplier and others so that I can manage my risk. But in the face of those uncertainties, that's very hard. And if we're talking about near commercial, not quite commercial technologies, there's a lot of reticence to take still unproven technologies and yet move them into market. And certainly if I'm bidding for the right to sell my electricity to a utility who's going to then sell it to their consumers like us, I've got to show them that my deal's good. compared to the competition. So I better bet right when I'm placing a fixed price on that and offering it that it's going to be right. Making, again, I'm going to focus my attention on proven technology as opposed to uncertain ones. If I have to go and make the case before state regulators and air regulators that my new power plant is okay to be built in this locality, I'm going to have to prove that my emission control system is going to work. It's going to live within the current emissions laws. And I'm going to try to get the vendor, the guy who made that equipment, guarantee the performance on NOx, on SOx, on carbon dioxide. So I'm going to want to get guarantees, which are going to be hard to get for unproven technologies. Gosh, this is really a depressing story, isn't it? These are the maps of kind of the predicate for the next picture. And that is another reason why it's hard to modernize the grid, is that we have a picture of electricity that's described in these three maps. They're my favorite three maps. It's basically coal country and the rest of the country. Coal country is in the big circle, and that's where cheap power is. Cheap power electricity prices are 5.5 cents in Kentucky, 6.4 cents in North Dakota. North Dakota does not want the climate bill to come forward. We're over there, what are we? I can't even read it. 16.5 cents, I think that's Maine. I think Connecticut right now is the most expensive after Hawaii. And we have very low carbon electricity here. We don't have much coal on the coasts, to be honest. And so there's a genuine inverse relationship between the content of coal and the cost of electricity. So there's fear of rate shock. I'll come back to this in a minute. But look at the difference in prices with, this is an estimate of the percentage increase in your electricity bill if the Waxman-Markey bill came along. So we already have expensive electricity, right? So it's going to be, and we don't have much coal and much carbon in our electricity, so we'll have a small impact compared to coal country, where you can imagine why that's Wyoming, West Virginia, North Dakota, Kentucky, Indiana. They're going to have, they may actually get close to our electricity prices if over time this were to occur. But that's a tremendously shocking event for those areas. It's no surprise why Congress is balking on doing what I hope happens soon, which is passing a carbon bill. But with this kind of picture, it's hard to see how you couldn't get there. Yeah?
So what kind of assumptions are you making about the cost, the allocation of credits?
This was performed by Bernstein Research. I believe they modeled the estimate where most of the well, it's a smorgasbord, but many of the allowances are given to local distribution companies in the electric side. And so there's an assumption that there will not be enough to cover all the carbon allowances that are needed in coal country, but there'll be a mitigating effect associated with getting some of those allowances for free.
I see. So I would assume that this would be under some, not just a one-time shock, but more like over 2 or 3 years.
Yes, the way that the bills typically are designed is that they start ratcheting the cap down over time. So that is the case, yes. But so if you look at the effect over a number of time, this is several years out. I mean, this is multiple years out. If has anybody here worked for a public utility commission? Sherry, I see you, you did. A 5% increase draws bullets on the commissioners. And so we're talking about a doubling of the cost. I mean, it's really no surprise why the congressmen, the Democrats from North Dakota, were not so excited about passing the law. We already did it. We already cleaned up our systems, and we've been paying for it down there. So when they talk about a wealth transfer, it does make me laugh, because we're already paying for a high electricity cost. And there will be, unfortunately, their economies in parts of the country are built around cheap electricity. So it would be very shocking. My personal view is the alternative to a cap and trade program is having EPA do it through the Clean Air Act, or have lawsuits of local communities suing companies for their contribution of damages associated with climate change. And that would be much more expensive than we see up there in terms of the cost impacts. And so these are clear impacts, but this is not a costless problem, obviously. And that's why when we heard that we were going to have modern technology, cleaner and cheaper utility bills, that was good. So the cost of modernization is high, and the policymakers whose faces I had up on my slides, ones that I know and love, in fact, they basically would like to see these changes introduced in a way that actually doesn't adversely affect jobs that are known by people who have real jobs today. So there are these conundrums that get posed when we actually put rubber to the road in integrating technologies. People in Washington love the smart grid and transmission, but they don't want electricity prices to go up, for sure. The loan guarantees, this is my personal favorite. I worked on the Obama transition as, at the Department of Energy. And I learned a bit about the loan guarantee program, set up in 2005 by Congress as a way to subsidize entry of advanced technologies, the certain first commercial installations of very capital-intensive new technologies, carbon capture and sequestration for coal, advanced nuclear. They would be issued loan guarantees as a way to make it more palatable for companies to bet their balance sheets in making those big investments. But the way the law is written and the way the Inspector General process works is you can't have taxpayers actually extending that much risk. So for somebody to get a loan guarantee, they have to come up with a big bubble of dollars up front to pay off in advance the subsidy that they're getting. So the person who's going in for the loan guarantee and can't get credit from the bank actually has to come up with the cash in the beginning to qualify to actually take the bigger loan guarantee home. And that's to protect taxpayers from bad bets. Understandable, but in one law you had both of those two things happening. To me, it's no surprise that the Department of Energy has actually not issued very many loan guarantees. Congress loves to finance research and development funds for clean technology. I showed you some of them. But far be it from you to actually work on one of the programs in one of the agencies where it doesn't prove out to work, you know? So you're working on technology, and again, the next Inspector General report is this one was bad use of taxpayers' money. Even though we may have had, on balance, 15% of the projects may have worked out great, like venture capital. The bad ones make it so that government folks are totally risk averse from going and actually performing on those bets. Oh, and my favorite one, generalized support. Congressmen love wind power, right? They love wind power, except if it's in their district. So this is a cartoon I took from, you know, everybody wants the people to come home from Guantanamo Bay, but not in their district. But the same is true, you know, everybody wants to site a wind farm, but not in my district. Or it's agreed, let's build power lines to, you know, move power from distant places to us where we all live, but don't put that new power line in my district. Same is true about climate legislation, but don't raise my electricity prices. And oil, let's stop paying off Saudi Arabia unless it means we can't have SUVs. So this is, you know, this is a perfect encapsulation of part of the problem about why we don't have new technologies moving. There's unfortunately a pattern in our system of governance. This is just more and more depressing, right? But I'm trying to explain why, if people are talking about government and public policy and technology, you actually have to solve some of these problems in order to move technology forward. Here's one. Old power plants. Old power plants, I already talked about how inefficient many of them are. They were built in the Eisenhower era. They are, in many cases, older than I am. And they were built long ago, and the utility who made the investment has depreciated the expense. So on their books, that plant really doesn't cost very much. So the rates that customers are paid, pay to use electricity actually reflect a really low cost for those. Additionally, that plant is already hooked up to the grid. It's got transmission rights. You don't have to build new lines for that particular plant. There's usually a locality where there's some jobs and tax payments associated with it. Okay, so that's the thing that exists. A new plant, by contrast, under the air laws, if you're building a new source of emissions, you have to meet brand spanking new requirements so that we don't put in place yesterday's technology, we put the most advanced technology in. So it's a much more expensive animal that's going to be built. It's going to be around a long time, so you want that. You want to put the best control technology in. But when you do that, it's sitting next to a really old clunker at times that's emitting, but you can't get the new one put in place. If a utility does that, they're going to roll that $1 billion of investment into its rates. There's going to be a rate shock. That's not so fun. This guy's the last guy on the block, so it needs to get transmission rights. So the guy who's not running very much, the old power plant, and essentially reserving rights on the system, the new one has to actually get new transmission built. So I could go on, making it very difficult for the next modern technology to actually get the old one shut down. There are misalignments in policy up the wazoo. On the one hand, the Economic Recovery Act, and just about every state in the nation, including our beloved Commonwealth of Massachusetts, has tremendous enthusiasm for energy efficiency, making sure that every appliance in your homes, every lighting fixture, cooling system is going to be turned over into tomorrow's technology. And one of the reasons why governors and congressmen and the president love that is because there'll be jobs. There'll be jobs of installers, there'll be jobs of manufacturers, and we will lower our electricity bills as consumers or energy bills as consumers. And we might not have to build so many power plants. But if a utility sees you doing that, its rates are based on, once its rates are set, it makes more money when it sells electricity. It does not typically make more money when you don't buy their product. And so there's a need to align the traditional way in which we set rates with the aspirations for what we're going to do on energy efficiency. And this is like a culture clash that, and our beloved Commonwealth did the right thing on this. They changed some traditional rate-making things in order to get those things lined up. But there are not very many states that have actually done that yet. Gosh, I had a picture here of 1,000 different agencies in the federal government and 1,000 different congressional committees. And I was painting a picture of who has something to do with energy. And it was basically a black map because I put a dot on every part of it. Everybody has something to do, whether it's the tax committee, the health committee, the energy committee, the water committee. Everybody has something to do with energy. And they have a different mission, right? The tax committee's mission is and the IRS is a really different mission than the Interior Department that's going to be doing royalties for offshore oil. So everybody has their own silo when they look at something from that point of view. And the laws are usually written so that there's nobody watching out to see whether or not the stuff makes sense when you add them all in there together. So there's all these legislative bargains at times to get one committee to join on to another committee, and that's the hell that in fact the climate bill is going to be stuck in at some point, because it's a tax issue, it is a energy issue, it's a climate issue, it's an agricultural issue. So there's all sorts of bargains that essentially are lowest common denominator in a lot of time. There's tons of examples you could come up there to show problems, and that just causes challenges for getting the job done. Congress is really good. It's hard for them to do this, but they're way better at writing laws authorizing research. The Energy Policy Act authorized research on carbon capture and sequestration, or advanced nuclear, wind battery systems for storing electricity. But they actually have to fund it every year. And the president has just said, as a deficit reduction, we will have tremendous amount of authorization for clean things that will not get able to be funded for obvious reasons. Even if Congress did it just right, even if that were the case, you would still, in our country, be looking for private investors at the end of the day to do most of the work and the heavy lifting on investments. And by investors, I mean you in your house. I mean the MIT. I'm calling that a private investor in saying this. Somebody else has to come up with the actual dough to make the down payment to buy the solar panel for the roof and put it up there. And so that means you have to get capital, and you have to be able to you have to go to the bank and be able to qualify for it and be able to repay it, et cetera. So even when that happens, times like this, where their capital markets are very constrained, it makes it hard to modernize the system. And that's not the case in some other countries. France, its electricity system is basically the state electricity grid. It's a different kind of system. In the Crown Corporation of Quebec is Hydro-Quebec. It's the provincial government that is essentially owns the corporation. That's not the model we use here. And Congress, believe it or not, Congress loves jobs programs, but in fact we are not quite competitive with China in our industrial policy. China, if they want you to build a solar manufacturing facility, they're going to line up the debt and get it arranged and actually build the facility before you can bring your equipment over there. Very different industrial policy going on in terms of on this clean tech stuff at the moment. Chicken and egg problems abound in the energy business. Let's think about electric cars. Electric cars, cool technology, plug-in hybrids, right? You've got your local storage. You could plug in at night when the electricity is in a surplus situation with power plants. You know, it's in the middle of the night, people are sleeping, so there's a lot of juice out there to fuel the batteries and fill them back up. But right now, consumers don't know that electricity is actually in a surplus overnight, right? Because you don't know that it costs 3 times the amount to produce power in the middle of the day as it does at night, right? Because your electricity rate is the same over the whole year. Every hour is the same for the most part. So if we don't change our electricity prices, why wouldn't you plug in your electric vehicle to recharge in the middle of the afternoon, creating more of an electrical problem? So do you change the rates first so that people actually see a price signal about the time to plug in? Or do you get the vehicles out there first? Without breaking that chicken and egg problem, we probably will be stuck in getting very many of electric vehicles. Same things, offshore wind, terrific resource. Do you build the wires out before the wind developers come with their wind turbines? Who's going to pay for that wire that's sitting there idle before the wind developer builds it? Same thing is true in North Dakota. Do you build the wires to Chicago first so that the wind developers will come? Or vice versa? Chicken and egg problem, terrible problem, basically, that exists on a lot of different modern technologies. I'm almost done, you guys. Oh, this one's really easy. Policy making is messy. It's really sausage making, right? And that doesn't stop policymakers from making a decision, right? So they come up with what they can come up with, which is usually a set of compromises that don't actually have integrity that works for signals to private markets and other things. Oh, sausage, there's more sausage. And there's really no cop on the beat in Congress or in the executive branch that says you can't pass that law because it's direct conflict with this other provision in that law. That's crazy, you can't do that. Well, we do it all the time. Nobody's there saying, you know, kind of that integrity. And the courts are asked often to articulate which one of those, and you know, that one exists in the law and that one exists in the law. And if it doesn't work in the real world, that's another court case. So in the face of that depressing scenario, why I hope you keep working in this area that we're all toiling in since we're 12, since we've been 12, is because we really do have tremendous challenges in this area. This is a picture I do use a lot because it is the emissions of carbon in the first 50 years of my life. So this is from 1950 to around 2005. And you can see the United States plume is a whole lot larger than China's plume. If this were a picture of emissions this year, China would be as high as the United States, in fact, a little bit higher. But this is cumulative emissions in the atmosphere for that 50-year period of time. This is why the developing countries think that we should go first, is this picture. And it's a good reminder to me about why we actually do need to do something. This is another picture of moving forward. So that on the right-hand side is 2030. The bars that are close up on the left, that's actual recent past. The red bars are the developed world. This is showing, oh, I didn't even put the units. Oh, those are tons of carbon. No, those are quads of energy, sorry. That's energy consumption. The reason I didn't know it was carbon is it looks the same. So we see the OECD, that's the developed countries picture, is growing a little bit. But you actually see the developing world, it's chugging off. They're getting their economic development. And if they do it this way, we're toast, right? If we don't use advanced technology around the world, we are all toast because everybody else's plumes will be up there like that. So this is carbon emissions. Same story. On the left, you see the actual recent past, the past couple of years. It goes to 2030. You have the developed countries on the bottom, developing countries on the top. That's the United States. That's Europe. Everybody else in the developed world is that little sliver. That's China, that's India, and the rest of the developing world. So we're toast if we do it the way we've been doing it in the past. And we need to do it sooner. I just told you all the reasons why it's hard and technology is really sticky. But if we don't do something sooner, we just keep going up that curve. This is the curve of tons of carbon emitted per year. The farther up we go in that curve, it's just that much harder to go down that wedge because you're already up the curve that much more. So in order to get to a level of carbon concentrations in the atmosphere, we've got to go way harder. And as you have a steeper curve, societies will have a much harder time getting there. The carbon equation is really the energy equation. It's about the number of people out there. It's about how much energy they use, how carbon intensive that energy is, and how economically they use energy to produce goods and services in the economy. So it's, the number of people are going up, right? We know that. We know that per capita economic activity is going up. We've got to do something about how efficiently we use energy and how carbon intensive energy is. So that's the part that I think we need to work on as we modernize the energy system. The red colors are, again, the developed countries in the OECD. We are a third of the people. We use 6 times as much energy per person in that world. And our energy use is double than in the developing countries. So if those folks want to grow, and their populations are growing, and they want to grow their economic activity, again, we've got to find a way to do it with much more modern technology. And that's why we need to do it, because we live in this world that's fantastic. You're going to be on this planet a whole lot longer than I am, so I hope that you solve this problem. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Questions? Yes?
I'd like to return to that Bernstein research graphic, which
Yeah.
shows the...
Oh, you want me to go there or not?
What?
Keep
You
talking.
can if you want. Which shows that in some states the electricity rates go up much more than others.
Yeah.
If I read the horizontal axis properly, the maximum increase, yes, it was about 20%. And certainly a 20% increase in a year would be horrible, and in 4 years would be tough. But how fast can you actually turn over coal-fired power plants to capture carbon dioxide? It might be a 20-year proposition, in which case, even in West Virginia, this is going to be lost in inflation. So is there such a big deal?
Well, a lot of things can happen in 20 years. People can actually lose businesses. I mean, factories that were built in a place where the electricity, think of aluminum. Okay, aluminum is in parts of the country.
If it goes up 1% a year, that doesn't seem so bad.
think that's what this is showing. It's not let's not focus on this, but focus on the reality. It's not going to go up 1% a year. In the parts of the country that have a high amount of coal, it is going to go up higher than that because there's so much carbon in those in the power production that it's going to probably go up. I think the estimates in North Dakota are more like 80% over the next couple of years in a carbon regime. So it's not 1% a year. Those are not cumulative. It's in a future time frame what kind of emissions, what kind of cost impact it'll be on rates. Okay? There will be a folding in some sense because it is a gradual ratcheting of the cap and therefore an increasing price. But the price of coal will go up tremendously, even in that short-term period of time.
I recall a $40 per ton carbon dioxide turns into about 5 cents a kilowatt hour increased cost, which would double, at wholesale. But again, we can't turn over the entire coal-fired electric power plant, industry in a few years. It's going to take 20 or 30 years.
So I'm not sure I'm hearing the point.
Double in 30 years, that is going to be lost in inflation.
But it's doubled in the first year, let's say. The price will go up right away. The price will go up in the short run as well as in the long run. In the short run, they'll go up as you actually have to buy allowances, and you have to pay for them, and you have to actually then, you may not be able to get so much coal, and you're going to be burning more natural gas. So some of the coal plants may run less, producing more from natural gas, which will be more expensive as well. So there will be a gradual increase associated with carbon allowance prices, I'm afraid to say. Yeah?
You showed the plot that showed the huge uncertainty what the real carbon price will be, partly because the law has a lot of wiggle room in it, but also the economic projections are hard too.
Yes, agreed.
From that point of view, from business point of view, would they prefer to have a carbon tax? They would know exactly what the price would be?
You actually see a lot of companies that own coal plants right now saying they would like to see a carbon tax. Excuse me, they would like to see a carbon program so that they can begin to find some finality on this. Some of them say they would prefer a carbon tax in theory, but think that that's not realistic, so that they're not putting their political sword on that. But a number of the owners of large generating stations these days are saying, we just would like to know and get on with it so that we can begin to plan.
And the whole theory is that politicians are afraid to say things a tax. They'd rather just raise your costs and not call it a tax.
A tax and a cap and trade program have, in my opinion, a different effect. A tax is a system in which you pay to do something, and it will not necessarily put a cap, because if everybody pays the tax and doesn't shift, then you can continue to emit. A cap says, that's it, and we're going to dole out allowances, and you might buy one from him and her, and then the price will go up, but you can't emit more than a certain amount. So I think they do have a different effect in the end of the day. They're going to put a price on carbon, for sure, but they have a different effect on emissions, and there's less certainty with a allowance price, cap and allowance. Yeah?
There's quite a few legislators who either don't believe in global warming, or if they believe in it somewhat, are more concerned about the impact on rates in the local economy. And given that, and again, I don't have too much political insight, but I was wondering what your insight might be in terms of whether you think there really would be a coalition that could put a price on carbon or reduce emissions in some way in the short term or medium term.
I think if the economy had not collapsed in the last year, there would have been such a coalition, because people would have been willing to say, we think that the problem, there were enough legislators in enough coalitions, and in one case it was the Democratic majority, who would have said, we will move forward. But when you fold on top of that the unemployment rates that we've had this year, it's just not tenable for people to make that kind of decision, which is why I think that a year ago people thought that when President Obama was elected, there was an expectation that there would be people were betting that there would be a carbon bill now, and the economy changed. And so I don't think that there's going to, I would personally bet we're not going to see a carbon bill this year. I hope that's not true, but I don't think there will be.
And given that, what the prospects might be next year, let's say, if the composition of Congress has changed too dramatically. I realize predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future.
My husband is a political scientist. He's sitting over there, so I'm loath to answer this in front of him. But so I think the Democratic majorities are going to be weaker next year. Do you all think that too? Okay, that's why I'm tiptoeing out on that one. I heard John Tierney recently say that some of the most aggressive environmental laws have come when people have had to compromise across party lines. You go, John Tierney. Maybe we will. Okay, ask him the question.
I don't know.
Because I'm just more blubbery. There's a question there? Yeah. Are you guys like sick of this or not? Do you want to go, sir?
We're gonna go for 2 more minutes.
Oh, 2 more minutes, okay.
What's your take on solar, commercial and otherwise?
Okay, so that's a really big question. I think solar energy is cool. We are seeing a dramatic driving down of photovoltaic prices as a result of manufacturing efficiencies in a number of countries. In part, it's been driven by country policies like Germany and Spain, who said, we're going to buy solar. And we're going to buy the electricity coming off solar. That made it possible for manufacturers to gear up, build, the equipment, et cetera. China said, oh, we can do it better than that. We're going to build those factories and employ the people and beat everybody's pants off. So they are driving down the price. I'm on the board of Evergreen Solar. Yeah. Let's see, the stock was, how much was it, John, when I, oh.
It was higher right before you joined the board.
I think it was $15 a share. It's now $1.44. When I was first starting to attend board meetings, the idea that you could sell solar for $2 a watt was, we can get there. That's great. Well, it's going, and it was, I don't know, maybe double of that a couple of years ago. China is gonna, kill everybody, all the competitors, because they will manufacture the panels for so cheaply that we are going to just see the costs continue to go down. Evergreen Solar's second manufacturing facility is not in Massachusetts, it's in China. And there was, that had to happen because for this company to stay in business, we had to go lower our costs, and we went to China. So I'm high on solar because I'd love that stock to go up. No, apart from that, I'm on that board because I believe in solar power has a real future and needs to go. And there's a number of policies that really are changing to create, a more stable demand for it in the future too. Okay, last question.
I was just wondering if you could, energy efficiency is very important, and there's a lot of focus on what's called demand response.
Yeah.
I know that, for example, out in Worcester, close to where I live, National Grid was proposing rather large-scale pilot,
Yeah.
and seemed like a reasonable thing to do. But I noticed, just using that as an example, really fighting very hard to scale it back down. So do you have an opinion on demand response? Because it seems to be, it's like you need to go to a large scale to get it to be effective from a business perspective. But
So does everybody know what demand response is? Hands up. Cool, you guys are such nerds, it's great. So yeah, I do think it's really important for lots of different reasons, and it is moving out in a number of ways. There are companies who are willing to pay to put the devices in customer installations and then do the controls because they'll manage the purchase of, kind of the sale of megawatts to the utility or the grid operator. So that's happening, that's growing. There are now a number of programs to get smart meters out there so that some chunk of the population will have visible prices and the ability to control their uses and program into devices when prices go like this, I'm going to be cut off automatically, or I'm going to have a choice about whether I'm going to cut off. So I think it's going to be gradual, and I think that's because of the economy. Again, there was a lot of competition for the Recovery Act dollars. National Grid didn't win. So that meant that if National Grid wanted to do that, they wanted to get approvals from the regulators about that new investment, and they gave them a chunk of it, but not as large as the original proposal. And that was a decision about how much rate impacts could be absorbed and other things. Okay, that was the last question. You guys are so nice. Thank you for your attention.